Okay, hey everyone, how you doing? Jonathan Lipp here from the Big Apple Film Festival. Good to see you all here again. Thank you. This is our final day of our festival and our final day of conferences. So today's discussion for the next 45 minutes, we'll be talking about cinematography, the art of cinematography. And we have with us two guests who have different levels of experience in the world of cinematography. We have Stephen Halloran, who has had films that he's provided cinematography for that have screened at Sundance, films that are available through IFC, on Hulu, and we'll talk a little about those. And Cameron is starting out in the world of film and has had quite extensive success in a short period of time. So let me ask Steve, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Cameron, how are you?
Good, good. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you for being here. So let's start with Stephen. Steve, you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
I lost the last part. What did you say? Did you say background?
Tell us a little bit about your background, sort of how you started out, and some of the projects you've worked on, that have had success.
Yeah, so I got my start shooting adventure sports films in high school, actually. I started doing surf movies in my hometown of San Diego, and it got me into this whole idea of adventure filmmaking, which jump-started a documentary career, say in my early 20s. And so I did a lot of traveling around the world and got to shoot a bunch of environmental films, and in that process realized that I wanted to have a little bit more control over what you saw on screen, the composition and the lighting, and that drove me towards pursuing a career in cinematography in the narrative space. Did grad school at USC, where I cut my teeth learning set protocol and making a network, where I eventually went out into the big film world and started shooting small indie shorts, which led to doing an indie feature called The Land in 2015 with a friend of mine that ended up going to Sundance, which jump-started my career shooting movies and documentary series. In the last few years, that included a couple other Sundance and TIFF features. Boy, Girl, or Dream, which was a 90-minute oneer that I shot in LA in 2018 with Omari Hardwick and Megan Good. And then a feature last year called The Obituary of Tunde Johnson, which is about police brutality. That went to TIFF. And then I've done some blockbuster work, second unit work on Creed 2 and Godzilla, and still I've continued to do some documentary series work. I just wrapped up a series last year for YouTube called The Age of AI, which was an 8-part series with Robert Downey Jr. About artificial intelligence, and try to keep my feet in both worlds, in feature filmmaking and in documentary, where my love for film grew from. So that's a real quick glimpse at how I got started and what I've been doing.
All right, very cool. Thanks so much. So Cameron, how about yourself? You're a 22-year-old filmmaker, and what kind of success have you had thus far?
Yeah, so actually a lot like Steve, I grew up in Park City, Utah, and instead of surf edits, I was making ski edits. So from 12 years old all the way through high school, all I did was chase around like my friends who turned out to become pro skiers and went to the X Games as the one making the films. And I kind of realized through that progression that, I wanted to tell stories and to, use, all this different kind of filmmaking and storytelling in different ways. So I went to Chapman University's film school, where I just finished my thesis film, Ironhead. That's at Big Apple Film Festival. I was at the Young Director Award in Cannes, France, Panavision grant, and a few others. And now I'm based in Los Angeles, and I primarily, full-time, I direct commercials and branded content, mostly in the active lifestyle kind of adventure, cars, anything that has speed or flavor to it. I love to put a cinematic twist on.
Great, thank you. So yeah, as Cameron mentioned, actually, Stephen and Cameron both have film screening in Big Apple. So before we go on, Steve, you want to just tell us a little bit about the project you have screening at our festival this weekend?
Sure. So it's a short 3-minute art piece, I call it, called Boneyard Ballet. It's a ballet piece set in an airplane boneyard in the Mojave Desert. set to Swan Lake from Tchaikovsky, and it's a study of the art of flight, human and mechanical, and a way of breathing life into this abandoned airplane graveyard, which, I have a real affinity for abandoned spaces when I shoot. And the idea came to me a number of years ago, actually, action adventure related again. I was going on a backpacking trip with my dad in high school up to the Sierras, and we were driving past the airplane boneyard in Mojave, and he's an airline pilot. And so he was pointing out a couple of the old planes that he probably had flown back in the day. And he was talking about how they were like big birds, and it got this idea in my head of staging a ballet piece in the graveyard. And it took 20 years for the idea to actually come to fruition. I was approached by Canon in February of this year to do a showpiece for their new C300 Mark III camera. They wanted something that was very visual, and dialogue was not something that was important. Story didn't matter as much. It was really about showcasing what the camera did. And I thought that this art piece that I thought about years ago would be a perfect showcase for their camera. So we got to take out these new pieces of equipment to the desert for a couple of days with a crew and shoot with a wonderful ballet dancer named Allison Stroming, and stage this little idea I had on an actual 747 and run around on the wing and all around the fuselage and put together this little piece, which I think is, poetic and beautiful in its own way, and an homage to, plane travel and dancing.
Cool. Yeah, Boneyard Ballet. Yeah, you can see it virtually up until midnight tonight at BigAppleFilmFestival.com on the virtual program. And Cameron, you want to tell us a bit about Ironhead?
Yeah, so it's a 20-minute short about a long lost brother and sister, and this brother, he's been looking for a sister kind of his entire life after they are broken up in their childhood, and he's carried this kind of broken character and damage to him. And after all these years of searching and looking for her, he finds out that she's actually a hired killer in 1990s, barren, lonely Los Angeles, very dark, neo-noir-esque thriller. And he has to make the decision if he still wants to see her or not, with now knowing this new mental weight of who she is.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Okay, yeah, again, so Ironhead, again, screening until midnight tonight. You can check it out virtually, BigAppleFilmFestival.com. All right, so if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. And in the meantime, let me first ask Cameron, if you're shooting sports documentaries or any sort of live, action sports footage, what are some strategies you use to give it the most effective look it could possibly get?
Most recently, just because I'll relate this to a project I just wrapped up with a Porsche influencer, Magnus Walker. I just shot a piece on the 2021 992 Turbo S, and on that I work with the same DP every time for these different car projects, and we really love to talk about the different focal lengths and when we're moving the camera and when we're not. And for like getting that speed and energy, we tend to always try to shoot really tight. And also normally instead of in the narrative world in Ironhead where we're nailing a setup and really making sure it's to perfection, sometimes in the with cars it's more about running the A camera, the B, the drone, and then having the rigs going all at the same time, so you're capturing more content and more perspectives and angles and different things to engage the audience, and have your editor really cut it and bring it to life. So yeah, a lot of it is also just getting a lot of coverage and cutaways and different perspectives and angles to really build the story or message you're trying to tell.
And so, Steve, over the years, when you look back on the early work you did until now, how has the art of cinematography changed in the last, let's say, 10 years or so?
Yeah, so I started shooting before DSLRs came to fruition, probably about a year or two before that. And I started shooting on the Canon ELPH, which was this tiny little point-and-shoot camera, just digital had taken off. iMovie had just landed. And so I was kind of in the era of digital kids, but I touched film when it was still a big thing, and it's making a bit of a comeback now. And so I've seen digital really take off, and the cameras, grow from being 720p cameras all the way up to 810K like they are now. And so I think the technology and the progress of the tech has been the biggest thing that I've seen change, and that's changed the way we work on set. The way we expose, the way we deal with data, how, the amount that we shoot. I mean, I think it's made things like what you're talking about, Cameron, being able to shoot the way you're shooting now with all these different cameras and the speed at which you're shooting, and having a drone in the air, and probably doing it all with a smaller crew than back in the day. That's all because digital's come about, and I kind of work the same way. I have this mindset of how many shots can I get off in a day? And, you have these inexpensive tools that allow you to do that. And I think that's totally revolutionized the way film gets made. And so I've seen that happen every year that I've been around cameras. And, I think it has its pros and its cons, but it's definitely been an interesting journey to watch, and it continues. It never stops.
Cameron, you mentioned also, you were shooting stuff in high school, and so even in the last like 5 years, let's say, have you seen any major changes in the way you approach cinematography in the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years?
Well, I think a lot of it has been just building off of what Steve was mentioning, kind of the progression and technology and where it's able to go. So I think now, mostly when I'm approaching a project with just the more experience I gain, it's more questioning, are we shooting this on a Red? Are we shooting it on Alexa? Maybe should we have GoPro 8s or 9s to get more unique angles? Or now the Red Komodo is out, which is a 6K camera that's 2 pounds. It's just a little bigger than a DSLR. So I'm hungry to get my hands on that and try some new perspective. So I think the more I kind of have worked, it's just with the budgets growing, it's kind of given me access to pick the lenses or the cameras more than I would have used to, and how that changes the look or kind of the tonality and aesthetic you're going for. So for me, it's been less about the equipment changing, but more about having access to more of it and exploring that.
Cool. Steve, there's a question in the Q&A box here. It says, how did you change your approach to cinematography coming from documentary to narrative?
Yeah, that's a great question. And they're interconnected. I would say that, starting out shooting run and gun documentaries on my own, everything was handheld, everything was fast. You had to be nimble all the time and adaptive. And those are all qualities that I still bring to my filmmaking process, particularly in the indie space. Budgets are tight, schedules are short. And so that sort of nimble, adaptive thought process is quite useful to bring over from the documentary space. At the same time, there's a level of control and sophistication to a lot of the narrative work that I do that I've had to practice. Coming from docs, like I said earlier, I didn't necessarily know how to light. I knew what I liked to my eye, but I didn't know what the best lighting would be. I didn't know how to necessarily block things, blocking with actors, and how to stage cameras and camera movement. So all of that was a learning process, and something that I develop over a period of time through education and through practice, like any other filmmaker would. So, it's a blending of the worlds, and I think you never forget where you came from. And for me, the documentary work that I've done always informs, the feature narrative work that I do. And in fact, it's become a lot more popular to have sort of that verite style in bigger budget projects. And so I get asked to do things with that look in mind, which is, hey, can you just operate this camera like you would a documentary, and give us this authentic feeling like we're in the room with these two characters and we're not staged on some dolly. And that tends to be the case with a lot of the indie movies that I do. So it's a nice cross-pollination that has happened.
All right. Someone just put in the chat box that original series you're shooting for Robert Downey Jr. What's the title of it?
Called The Age of AI.
The Age of AI. Okay. All right. Great. Let me go over to the chat box here. So here's a question. Do you have advice for someone who's just starting out to explore cinematography? There's so much info out there about cameras and lenses. Where would you recommend someone start? So why don't we actually go to Cameron first? How did you start?
I think my best recommendation with this is just chase whatever, you're most passionate about. And that's, if you want to start shooting films, with your friends or nature or landscapes, whatever that may be, I'd say, get a modest camera, an investment, and start there, and, make a weekly goal or a monthly goal to be putting out a certain amount of content. And don't limit yourself, and just focus on wherever you see your energy going. And that's how I started. I made, I don't know, probably 100 ski edits through the time I was in high school, and that got me to film school. And then, just it all kind of starts to build and build, so long you're always putting yourself, towards where you like feel it the most and enjoy it the most. So yeah, maybe Steve might have a better reference for a camera setup or something to start with in particular, but I'd say whatever kind of inspires you.
Cool. Steve, any thoughts on this? Where to start out? How to start?
Yeah, definitely got a few. I mean, Cameron definitely brings up a great point that practice makes perfect. And I don't remember the exact saying, but I think it's 10,000 hours of dedicated work on a specific thing makes you a master. And so it does just take a lot of time in the trenches, shooting, editing, and honing your craft. I think it's important to educate yourself on the technology and get to a level of comfort with the equipment that it becomes an extension of your process and an extension of your body. So you're not even thinking about, how you're brushing your teeth. You've used the toothbrush so many times. It's the same with the camera. You can get to that point with the camera where now you're thinking about story and composition and lighting, and the camera's a secondary thing. So those two things would be practice. And then the other thing for me that's always been huge is education and exposure, and looking back at the masters who've come before, whether it's cinematographers or other filmmakers, but also the artists from farther back. And some of the great painters, have created these incredible masterpieces that can inform you and hone your eye. And I think at first when you start shooting, you're mimicking quite often. And as you're comparing yourself to these great works and refining and criticizing what you do, I think you get better that way. And that's something that I've always done, is held my work to a really high standard, even when it didn't quite live up to it, so that I could say, oh, okay, this is what I could do better here, but I got this right. And so I'm constantly educating myself like that. Even now, I think that would be part of my process till I'm out of the biz. So.
Samuel in the chat box is a question for both of you. So we'll go to Cameron first. Spherical or anamorphic?
It definitely depends on the project. They have their own different unique looks and kind of a vibe you get from it. I just shot a project across 8 locations in LA, a running piece on anamorphic. And what that kind of tends to do is it will bring your background, closer, and it could, depending on the glass, it kind of creates distortion on the edges. So, you'll see that a lot, and kind of what actually Steve was mentioning with authentic looks in the commercial world, where these different kind of handheld styles where anamorphic glass could really play into it. Or you also see it on like huge movies like Star Trek when there's these crazy lens flares. So it's a particular look. On Ironhead, my Big Apple film, we shot on spherical on Panavision Primo primes. Because it created a much more milky look between the blacks and the contrast, and for the shadows, and kind of gave us, a 1990s look we wanted. So I think before I just keep talking about lenses, I would say that each project really, like Steve was talking about, you want to hone in a craft, a look, a visual language is how I like to talk about it with my cinematographers I work with. And every project deserves its own visual language, its own style, and when you're moving the camera, when you're not, what glass you're on. So I think, I love shooting on both. And I think anamorphics are definitely very attractive for a lot of filmmakers in the music video and commercial world. I tend to like spherical better for narrative films. But yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, Cameron, you hit it on the head for sure. It really does depend on the project, what set of lenses you're going to use. The fun thing these days is that the bigger sensors are allowing us to utilize a ton of different lenses that weren't available before, older lenses even. So yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for, once I get the story, I'm looking for character in a lens, and the anamorphics tend to have a ton of character, as Cameron was saying. The soft depth of field, the bouquets you get in the background on the lights, they have a real romantic patina to them, and that's something that's great, particularly when you're first starting out in the indie space. You often need to hide things in the background that you can't production design. You're shooting in active locations, or maybe you have a little corner of a cafe that you're staging a scene in, but the rest of it is still live because you couldn't afford to close it off. And so with the anamorphic, with the real shallow depth of field, you can blur all of that out, and you can walk away from it with people saying, hey, that looked like a big budget movie. And quite often it was the lenses that hit a lot of the things in the background. So I've done that a ton. And then, like Cameron was saying, in the music video world, light interacts differently with the anamorphic lenses because it's an oval shaped lens instead of spherical or circular. And so you get different refractions and different effects, and it's just a ton of fun to shoot with those. So the anamorphic's always been popular for me, although, there's a importance to spherical as well, with their clinicalness, a lot of, food photography, and even my last feature I did on spherical. So at the end of the day, it all depends. And I think the most important thing is getting comfortable with the different types of lenses, so you know what they do and how they can be used and how they can be bent and changed and utilized for your purposes. So it's fun. It's like, picking between different types of wine. There's a ton of varieties.
Nice. All right. Again, yeah, if anybody has any questions, put it in the Q&A box. I'm curious about your thoughts on verite style for narratives. Either one of you want to take that question, or both of you? Yeah, verite style for narratives. You think that's an effective way to go?
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in on that one.
Oh, and also, just you just clarify for everyone verite style, just in case there's anyone who's not completely sure of what that style is.
Verite style is sort of an in the moment. I tend to think of it as like this in the moment handheld documentary-esque look for a film. So you can think on a big budget level, maybe a Jason Bourne movie, where the camera's active. It's part of the scene. It's not sitting back in a staged proscenium where the acting is taking place in front of you, almost in an operatic sort of way. It's the opposite of that. It's a very active, engaged.
Woody Allen films as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they tend to be handheld because the handheld movement makes it feel like the camera's alive. And that's really come into play as the cameras have gotten smaller, as digital landed, as young filmmakers like myself or Cameron now have come up through the ranks. I think there's a desire for an authenticity and a new look compared to the classics. And so verite has become a very popular thing in filmmaking. And it's quite often now that, even that every movie I do has some verite or it could be all verite in some instances. The last movie I did, which came out yesterday on demand, it's called Chick Fight. It was this action comedy I shot in Puerto Rico last year with Alec Baldwin and Melon Ackerman. And it's this underground female fight club. It's just a ton of laughs. And we shot all this action fight footage in this ring that we built in Puerto Rico. And, it was a small budget, so we didn't have all the toys in the world. And to make it feel real and alive, I operated the camera handheld in the ring the whole time in a verite style to hide certain things and sell punches and do all that. So
Where's the film available now? What platforms is it on?
Oh God, I wish I could tell you. I don't know. It's streaming on all the major online platforms. You can probably find it on Apple TV on demand on your TV.
Okay. And what's
It's called
the title again?
Chick Fight. Yeah.
Chick Fight with Alec Baldwin.
What's that?
Okay. With Alec Baldwin.
Baldwin, yeah,
Chick
yeah.
Fight.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. So, Cameron, you mentioned before there was two cameras you mentioned before. We get a lot of films that use either the Alexa or the Red. Cameron, do you prefer? Is there one you prefer over the other?
I think I think definitely the Alexa. A lot of people always on any project, especially as I mostly, whenever I'm working with a cinematographer, they always, we always want to get an Alexa Mini. Typically, there definitely is times where like Reds are great to shoot with, and it's still an amazing camera. And I think it's more about the glass and the colorist. And a good. Sorry, just cut out for a second. On Ironhead, we shot an A/B setup on virtually every take, and our A camera was an Alexa Classic, and our B camera was actually a Red Gemini shot on Panavision Primo Prime. So it was more about the lens and then making sure the colorist knew what space to pull it in, where we were going with the look, and matching the two. Because in my case, as a short and kind of, I'm sure everybody in this chat could relate to, when it comes to telling the stories that we truly love and care about, like narratives, you just do whatever you take to make it. So I had a Red Gemini from one grant and an Alexa Classic from another grant, and then just paired the same lens on it. So the cameras are very important, but it's more about the glass, the colorist, and you could shoot cross format and match it no problem these days.
Steve, do you have a preference, one over the other, the Alexa, the Red?
Yeah, I mean, I also enjoy the color space and the look of the Alexa over the Red. But I've shot on both cameras successfully, and Cameron hit it on the head again. It's a colorist and lensing and lighting at the end of the day that makes or breaks you. I think a lot of the high-end digital cameras these days are pretty good. So I'm at the end of the day, I'm agnostic on it. I've shot 4 features, and the first one was the Alexa. The second one was a Sony a7S II. The third one was a Canon C700 full frame, and then the last one was another Alexa. So it's a mixed bag. Some of my doc work has been Red. So it all just really depends on what you have access to, what you can afford, and you make the rest work.
There's a question in the chat box that I was actually going to ask both of you as well. Were there any cinematographers, and so who are they, that inspired you, and in what way? Either of you want to have any thoughts on that?
I think for me, I personally love Christopher Nolan's films, and Wally Pittsford, his director of photography. I always wanted, when I was in college, to find a way to get the scope and the grandiose quality through how they would frame and light and wides that really establish a world and where we are. And I think that's what always drew me into filmmaking, is be able to capture these subjects and be able to create such an energy behind it. And then more speaking towards the director, I'm absolutely in love with all of David Fincher's work, and I think it's because his cinematography style and visual language is so inherent, ingrained to any given story he's telling. If that's his second feature, Seven, with or his Netflix show that he just did, Mindhunter, it's where the camera and the style of it speaks so much to how the characters act and how they're nuanced. So I think that's kind of been my my biggest inspiration personally.
Yeah. Steven, do you have any inspirations?
Yeah, I think I took a lot of my inspiration from specific films growing up. Say Apocalypse Now is a big one for me. I think that was Doraro did that. I'm not mistaken. I should know that actually. I loved Braveheart, which John Toll did that. And those two cinematographers have done amazing things over their careers. I love the sweeping grand epics, you know, with their massive landscapes and huge choreographed action has always been exciting for me. You know, Bill Pope and the Matrix series was huge. And then, you know, recently I'd have to pick the two guys that have been just crushing it at the Oscars the last 5-6 years. Lou Besky with his work in The Revenant was hugely influential for me, the way that he shot close up but extremely wide and choreographed these big, you know, action set pieces in the middle of the winter. I really enjoyed that camera movement that he employs. And then Roger Deakins has been a huge touchstone for me over the years for his lighting and his composition. So yeah, it's an ever evolving adoration for filmmakers, past and present. And, you know, we're always teaching each other things.
All right. So what about, you know, sort of this new, I don't know how new it is anymore, but sort of new movement of shooting on iPhones. What are your thoughts on this? Cameron, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on shooting on an iPhone? Do you think they have the quality now where you can shoot a legitimate film just using an iPhone?
I think you would have to, in my opinion, play into its format to make sure it's like ingrained into the story. So, for example, a director who I've been talking to a lot, he's represented by Step Studios. He did a quarantine short film, and he used the whole film is through the perspective of a laptop like we are right now, and through these different Zoom calls throughout like this day to tell this love story. And it was really ingrained into the story. So for me, I think if I were to be using an iPhone to tell a story, I could see myself doing that in the commercial world, where maybe I have a cutaway to a character and they're riding in a car together, or, you know, they're running through the streets, and you actually have an iPhone recording the selfie in perspective. So that's how I would use it. I would actually like ingrain it to be very like hyper particular to the look. But beyond that, you know, they do keep getting better and better, and I'm sure under the right, you know, lighting, if in controlled circumstance, you could definitely shoot a short on it. And I think it'd actually be most important to, you know, lob up your actors and throw up a boom pole and make sure the, you know, the audio is good and crisp and clear to go with the iPhone look. So you know, I haven't shot like a short or project on it, but I definitely seen people do it. And I know also the director, Steven Soderbergh, on that were shot on iPhone too. So it's definitely a movement.
Steven, any thoughts on shooting on iPhone?
Yeah, I mean, it's another tool that, you know, you can dip into whenever you want to. And I first used one on The Land, which was that first Sundance feature that I shot. And we used it much in the way Cameron was talking about it, where the actors had a cell phone up and they were shooting themselves doing skate tricks. And so we gave them my iPhone with the Filmic Pro app, which allowed us to record at high resolution and utilize the sensor in the camera to the best of its capability. And so that played great in that sense of found footage, and you could believe it that it was iPhone or cell phone footage. But yeah, I mean, the new images coming out of that camera are pretty spectacular. And speaking of one of the cinematographers that I admire, Emmanuel Lubezki, who did Revenant and Birdman and Gravity and all these wonderful films. I think he just shot a movie on the brand new iPhone 12, quite possibly. It was their big launch film. And it looks pretty spectacular. I think that it's getting close in terms of the sensor resolution. I don't think the color space and the optics are on the level that premium level cinema cameras are at. And it's probably going to be a really long time before they merge. I do like the idea of cameras getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I do see a world where someday maybe the camera is just the size of an iPhone in a rig with a beautiful lens on the front, because you can't really beat the optics of a finely you manufacture large lens like that. Just the size gives you a specific type of quality. But I do see a world with a tiny camera on the back, and the rest of it goes to the cloud, and everyone's accessing it live in the moment on their iPads, and it's nimble, and that would be great. So hopefully these worlds will combine at some point. But if you want to shoot, if you want to get out there and shoot today, it's the best tool out there to do anything you want.
The film Tangerine?
Yeah, I have.
And if you have, do you know what they did to kind of give it the more cinematic look that that we see on the screen? Because it wasn't.
Yeah, they used a Moondog Labs anamorphic lens adapter on the front of the camera, which I used a few months after them on the land because we shot the land anamorphic. So it was a little clip-on adapter. It went on the iPhone 6 or 7 possibly. It just slides right on in front of the lens on the actual camera, and it gives you an anamorphic look. So that and color correction and then the right lighting, and you could get a look like Tangerine. I'd imagine with the new iPhone cameras, it'd be far superior. I don't know if Moondog is still making them for the new cameras, but they might be. And so yeah, that's how I did that.
All right. Cameron, do you use drone footage, and what's the best sort of way to go about grabbing drone shots?
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of drone coverage and narratives, but a lot of the branded content, definitely using drones all the time. And I think the best way to go about it is, they're really great for establishing shots. They're really great for kind of getting close and chasing a subject. So I would say, and also it's an easy way to shoot two cameras at once, kind of like Steve and I were talking at the beginning of the call. You could have your A camera anywhere on sticks or on a dolly, and then you'd have your B camera, which is the drone in the air. So for me, the best way to use it is to always be capturing more coverage, because on a lot of these shoots, you might only have one 12-hour day, and all of us filmmakers wish we had 2 or 3 or 4. How much more? We all want more time, no matter the project or budget. And I would say with drones, I use it mostly as capturing a really great B angle, and I'll be with my cinematographer, really focusing on our plan and what we're trying to capture. And sometimes when I'm working with a great drone pilot, it's like, hey, this is what we're getting. How about a shot like this, or, do what you think, because there's so much going on in a day or so much prep that it's kind of nice to hire somebody great and let them do their thing and, empower them to, just capture the second angle.
Cool. Was there one more question for you? Sorry. There was a question in the Q&A box for Stephen. I think you mentioned there was a certain adapter. Lisa's asking, what was the name of that adapter? I think it was when you were talking about Tangerine.
Called Moondog Labs. Let me see if I can find it. Moondog Labs. See if it'll still pop up. Yeah, here we go. So I'll put this link in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
So they make all kinds of modern adapters. Let's see. For different cameras. So I'm not sure if they're making those for the iPhone still. I haven't gone on there in a couple of years, but I imagine they are.
All right, and then finally, there's a question in the chat box, but this is sort of to wrap it up here. It was a question I was going to ask both of you. If anybody has any more questions or wants to keep in touch with you somehow, because someone mentioned here, she said, I'm a USC grad school now. I'd love to talk with you more at some point. Is there a way that any of the attendees here can keep in touch with either of you? Maybe social media, email, maybe a website, some way to continue to keep in touch?
Yeah. Email is usually email or Instagram is the best way to get in touch with me. So my email's on my website, but I can throw it in the chat box too. And yeah, happy to answer any questions or share any experiences or give any advice that I can.
And
people they work with this.
Okay. And Cameron, yourself?
Same answer. It's funny. A lot of people I network now as people hit me up through Instagram, and I'll do the same with other filmmakers. And then yeah, my email's on my website. I could just add it in the chat right now.
All right.
And of course, always happy to chat.
All right, great. Also, the Moondog Labs, it only went through to the panelists, so I re-entered it here for panels and attendees. So you guys can all see that now. Moondog Labs, and then we have Steve's email here if you want to keep in touch with him, and we have Cameron's email as well. Let's see, does it go through to everyone? Oh, Steve, yours just went through to the panelists again. If you want. Yeah, just
little.
like a drop-down menu, you can put it to.
Yep, got it.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. All right. So in conclusion, I'm going to start with Cameron, then we'll go to Steve. Do you have any final bit of advice for anybody on here who may be interested in pursuing a career in cinematography? What would be your overall advice or statement?
I think this is really funny, but something that Steve mentioned that I kind of laughed at to myself is that a lot of this, the cinematography world is like wine. I'm just 22, so I didn't think wine was good till a year or two ago, but now it's like you kind of get what you can, and things are more expensive and cheaper, and you continue to progress and find the nuances within that. And I think that's the biggest thing about cinematography is just wherever you start, bring all your energy and passion to it, and then always keep exploring. Question, why would I use an iPhone? Why would I use a drone? Why would I use a spherical versus anamorphic? Is all the things you should be doing. And over time, when you get a project or story, you'll just know, hey, this is Alexa Mini, this is an A/B setup, this is on spherical. You'll just, all those things will start to come together. So I think the biggest thing is right now, wherever you're at, just create with what you can. Always be kind of curious and fascinated about the next best equipment. And, it'll kind of, you'll start to understand how that will create a look or aesthetic or a tone. And to be really, in a good way, be critical of your work. For me, everything I do, I'm always trying to achieve a high end, a cinematic look. And I'm trying to make whatever budget it is, look 3 or 5 times bigger, because that's how, as a 22-year-old filmmaker, I'm going to grow if I could show people I could do this at the highest level, and I could, compete with big production companies, or I could, put together stories that have a lot of scope and style like Christopher Nolan. So I'd say always be, pushing yourself for your work to look much bigger, and for, budget wise, it should look a lot bigger than it actually is. And if you could do that, it's a constant progression and chase.
Okay. And Steve, any final thoughts on those pursuing a career in cinematography?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it like you're your own entrepreneur, because you are, in a way. And so you have to look at it on I would say a 5 to 10 year timeline of honing your eye, training your skill sets, educating yourself in the cinematography and filmmaking world overall. You should know story and editing and all the other sides of filmmaking. It'll make you a better cinematographer. And then you should be networking and meeting really cool young directors like Cameron, and all kinds of other people, producers and whoever that you can continue to work with. And then the last thing is to just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. The more mistakes you make, the better you get. It's like I've been a big surfer my whole life, and the only way you can learn how to surf well is to take your wipeouts on the wave, get back on the board and paddle back out and do it again. And so that form of repetition combined with those other aspects that I was talking about of business building can get you to the place where you want to be in cinematography, I think, in a time span of, say, 10 years.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. For all the attendees, thank you for being here. Definitely check out Boneyard Ballet and Ironhead, BigAppleFilmFestival.com. Until tonight at midnight, they'll be available to watch. So Cameron Thurman and Stephen Holleran, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to all of our attendees. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.